The Sonos Beam and the Arc are both current soundbars from Sonos. While the Arc is Atmos capable and stages a huge sound field, the Sonos Beam is half the price of the Arc. Today, we measure the frequency response of both the Beam and the Arc in a quick test in an attempt to answer that very question. As usual in my videos, I throw up the answer to the question up front. Based on the frequency response curves of both the Sonos Beam and the Arc, it does seem that the Sonos Beam can hold its own against its bigger brother from the Sonos stable, in at least the bass and mid-range department. The Sonos Arc has a much larger soundstage. It also supports Atmos, but to get the most out of it, you will need a relatively modern TV with Atmos support and an eARC port. Whether you find the Arc is worth the extra 100% price premium over the Beam depends on a few factors, like the size of your room and whether your setup actually supports Atmos. If your room is on a smaller side and if your TV doesn't have eARC and Atmos support, I'll say just go for the Beam. It is actually a very capable soundbar in its own right, and you have the spare cash to buy another two Sonos One SL for the surrounds. Or if you can actually score a discount on a Sonos Sub Gen 2, I'll show you later in this video how potent that combination is with the Beam. Today's deep dive comparison of the Sonos Arc and the Sonos Beam entails frequency response measurements. This is done with a factory calibrated UMIC 1. For those of you who are not familiar, it is a very well constructed mic and it connects to my MacBook Pro via USB. I use it for all my frequency response measurements in this channel. The measurements are taken with REW software running on a MacBook Pro. REW software is a relatively complex piece of software which generates frequencies through the output device, either the Beam or the Arc or any other device, and then it measures the same output with the attached UMIC 1. If you like my methods in reviewing, analyzing, and comparing wireless speakers, do consider subscribing to my channels for more of such videos. I've set up the Arc and the Beam in the exact same location, and the UMIC 1 setup won't move from between the tests. The Beam is actually part of my living room setup, but for the purpose of this test, it needs to be in the exact same location. This is so that there won't be extra variables contributing to the differences in the frequency response. I will run through the test for the Sonos Beam first, followed by the Sonos Arc. The first two tests won't have a sub added. The third test will have a sub Gen 2 added to the Sonos Beam, and the final frequency response test will be done on the Arc with a sub Gen 3. I've used the older Gen 2 subwoofer on the Beam because I think we can get a Beam and a sub Gen 2 setup for money which is quite close to the amount that you'll be paying for the new Sonos Arc alone. Being new releases, the Sonos Arc and the sub Gen 3 will run for the full price for quite a while. For all the tests, TruePlay has been turned off. EQ settings are both 0 for treble and bass. Loudness is left on in default position, and when the sub is connected, it is set to a neutral volume bias. The first light green curve is for the Sonos Beam on its own. You will see that it goes down to 55 Hz quite confidently. There are some high energy peaks within the 100 Hz to 300 Hz range, after which it comes down and remains relatively flat all the way to 20 kHz. The next light rate curve I'm introducing is for the Sonos Arc on its own. Clearly, you'll see that the Arc performs better at the lowest frequency. I would say that it is sounding as loud as the Beam, even down to 45 Hz. Interestingly, the Arc doesn't go as loud as the Beam from between 100 Hz and 600 Hz, and again between 3.5 kHz and 8 kHz. The Arc then takes over the treble range and dominates it with a peak at 12 kHz. And that's where some of you might find the treble start to get a little bit intrusive and irritating. Comparing both the Sonos Beam and the Arc without the sub, it seems that the Sonos Beam does hold its own in terms of how it sounds. Aside from lacking some grunt at the lower end, the curve suggests that the Beam can sound quite energetic for dialogue and is probably a much easier listen on the ears at higher frequencies. Besides the beam versus arc frequency response comparison, I think the most important comparison that we will do today is actually for that of the beam plus the sub Gen 2 combination to see if it will perform better than the arc on its own. I'll turn off the curve for the Sonos beam on its own, and now I'll introduce the dark green curve, which is the frequency response for the Sonos beam paired with a sub Gen 2. Right away, you'll see that the beam and the sub combination works all over the arc. The bass department gains an authority that the arc on its own will never put out. And throughout the entire frequency response range, the beam has been freed up to use its amplification and drivers to drive the higher frequencies above about 150 Hz. The frequency response is much better and louder all the way to 16 kHz, since the bass duties has already been handed over to the sub. Actually, without even looking at the frequency response curve, I would have been able to tell you the answer right away. The addition of a sub to any Sonos speaker will immediately double the performance and triple the enjoyment. Of course, I'm using subjective terms of reference, but I think you get my point. The sub Gen 2 can be bought with discounts of up to $150, and if you are keen-eyed, you could score another $50 discount on the Sonos Beam, maybe on Amazon. So this combination with the discounts costs right about $900. You won't be able to score the same kind of discounts on the newer sub Gen 3 and the Sonos Arc, with the Arc costing $800 on its own. Finally, for the sake of completeness, the response curve for the Sonos Arc and the sub Gen 3 is presented here in dark red, and we contrast it to the dark green curve for the Sonos Beam paired with the sub Gen 2. The Sonos Beam and sub combination stacks up pretty well to the Arc and the sub combination. There could be potential bloom issue with the beam at about 100 Hz, but the lower frequencies are all looking very good for both the setups. The rest of the curve looks similar except for the high frequency peak introduced by the Arc, but that's not what we are concerned about today. Suffice to say that the Arc still has that pesky high treble peak. Today's video is about the Sonos Beam and how it stacks up against the Sonos Arc while costing only half the price. And with that in mind, my conclusion is that the Sonos Beam still remains a very solid buy in 2020 in face of even the newest Atmos capable soundbar from Sonos. For $399 or even less with a discount, it will be one of the best soundbars that you can get for the money today. Further to that, if you can spare the cash for the Arc and maybe just another $100 more, seriously consider getting the Beam with a Gen 2 sub. This makes for a super potent combination. Now, to be crystal clear in my recommendation, the Sonos Beam with a sub Gen 2 delivers a much better sound than the Arc on its own, and with some discounts, it's not even a lot more expensive than the Arc on its own. In fact, I'll dare say that the combination sounds twice as good as the Arc on its own. This concludes today's comparison video between the Beam and the Arc. I hope you have found it useful, and if you have yet to subscribe to my channel, please do so. I'll be reviewing the brand new Sonos 5s in about 2 weeks' time. I'll see you in my next video.